Previously on Shop Live TV.
My friend brought in his S2K with some timing codes and an engine rattle / knocking noise. So I did what anybody would do. I took off the valve cover, checked the timing, checked all of the valve adjustment clearances. Actually I performed the valve adjustment, and we also ended up resetting the timing. We also changed out the timing chain tensioner. When we put everything back together, the noise still remained, and shortly thereafter, the timing codes came back. So I got all of these parts overnighted from Japan. The real ones will get that reference. But on the real though, we got them from Honda. They were all special order items because the S2K, the timing chain doesn't really go out. Like, it's not really a maintenance item. But the main reason I believe this timing chain got stretched to the point where the timing started getting messed up was because of that aftermarket tensioner. So the tensioner on here is a Belade Sports. There's a lot of good reviews. There's also a lot of bad reviews. So for this one, unfortunately, I think it's going to be a bad review. That's most likely what caused that timing chain to stretch to this point. But what we're going to be doing is we're going to be replacing all the chains, the guides, even the oil pump chain and guide, and then we're going to be putting back the factory timing chain tensioner. So at least for the break-in time, we're going to use this factory tensioner, and then after that, the break-in time should be right around 1,000 to 2,000 miles. We might go ahead and send this into a forum member called Billman, and they actually rebuild these tensioners with upgraded parts, but they're still like the factory style, so it shouldn't overstretch that chain. Let's just go ahead and get on with it. Let's get all these nice new parts in this engine. All right, so we're gonna pull all this stuff back off. Valve cover comes off. We have to remove both camshafts. We have to remove the timing cover, that crank pulley, pull the timing chain off, and then we actually have to remove all of this stuff before we get to any of that. We also have to remove the oil pan from underneath, and then we should have access. The actual manual, the Honda manual, the service manual for this engine says you have to remove the whole cylinder head to do the job, which technically you shouldn't have to, since we're gonna be removing that idler gear and all of that stuff. It should be able to be done without removing the whole head. Ugh. This is why I put a lift in. But
Weak boy.
hey, I haven't worked out in a couple weeks. Losing my gains. God. Yeah, that ain't gonna work. When you're not strong enough, use leverage. Although I'm very strong, it's late at night. I could use a beer. What you think, babe?
No.
Why?
Then you get beer breath.
I'll brush. There used to be a guy on YouTube that was very famous for E46s. I don't know if he still is, but his name was Bullshit Corner. And literally, he would just be like drinking beers all the time whenever he's working on his car. I think he used to make DIYs too. I think he was before me, actually. Before I started. Oh, how times have changed. We've been doing this stuff for 5 years, almost 6 years now. Man, oh man, look how far we've come.
Oh, you look.
The lighting make me look good, don't it?
No.
All right, so now that I've got the cam chain tensioner out, we've got the engine at top dead center for cylinder 1. Now what I'm doing is I'm removing all of these camshaft holders. So I've already went ahead and loosened all of these bolts in the same, well, pretty much the opposite sequence of how you tighten them. So there's like, this is the last one that you tighten, so I loosened that one first, and vice versa, just however it goes through. So all these are loosened. Before that, I actually loosened all of these adjusting screws. That way there's not much pressure against the camshaft. There still will be a little bit from, I believe, cylinder 2, but that's okay. So now I'm just gonna remove the rest of these, pull these camshafts out, then we can continue. This is fairly simple on this car, mainly because you don't really have to lock the timing in place, because the camshafts, they have their own gears. There's no chain that goes on the camshaft directly. The timing chain actually goes on this adjuster gear, or idler gear, that's what they call it. So that's where the actual timing chain goes from there to the main crank socket. So we can remove all of this without disturbing any of the timing. It's just when you reinstall it, you have to make sure that these are in the right spot. So I already loosened this Jesus bolt on this crank pulley. I actually bought this crank pulley socket. So it's like a weighted socket, and it weighs a lot more than your normal 19mm socket, which is the size of that bolt. And I just put it on my impact, my air impact, and I just got it off. And actually my big compressor is not in the shop, so I just used a small little pancake compressor, and I was able to get it off with a few short zips. I mean, it did take like 10 minutes, but it came off. So this socket does make a huge difference. I'll have a link down below. It is a crank specific socket made by Mophie's off of Amazon. So that allows us to just take it off by hand now. And the main reason we're removing this crank pulley is because we got to take off this front timing cover case, and that will allow us to get access to the chain and the actual sprocket, that goes on the crankshaft. I just made sure that everything is in time, TDC right now, and that's at this white dot. And this only goes on one way, like you can see it's keyed, so it only goes on one way, so you don't have to worry about that. So we ran into some major issues. I was ready to put the oil pan back on after we got that chain and the oil pump back in, and I started cleaning out the oil pump, and as soon as I was starting to drain, I started seeing little chunks of metal. And it was kind of hard to see that because it was stuck in the baffle under some oil. And as soon as I saw that, I took the oil pump back off, took the baffle back down, and I found that one of the rod bearings had completely spun. So the main reason I didn't catch that earlier was because we were going based on the code and me noticing that the timing was off. And that's why I had the impression that the timing chain was the issue and that's what was causing the rattle. But the actual issue that caused the rattle was one of the rod bearings being spun. And then we also had those codes because the timing was off. So there was a bunch of issues going on, and that pretty much results in that whole spun bearing, and that's going to cause us to not continue with this whole repair. So originally, if it was just that timing issue, we would have been okay with just doing all of this. But with that rod bearing being spun, we don't want to take any chances. So I gave the guy the option of either rebuilding the engine or finding a used engine. So we're gonna go with a used engine and we're gonna keep this as a spare. We might even do a F22 swap from an AP2 S2K. So we're gonna keep all that in the open. Right now, what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna put everything back together as far as putting the oil pan back on, the timing cover, valve cover, keep the cams and all that stuff out for right now. And we're just gonna get this car back to his place until we can source an engine. These engines are hard to find. S2Ks are getting rarer by the day, so we want to make sure we have the right engine and have that engine completely gone through. We're going to put all this new timing components, new rod bearings, all that stuff on the replacement engine before we put it in here. So unfortunately, this is where we're going to have to end this series for now. We will resume once we source another engine. So hope you guys enjoyed as much as I got to it. I wish we could have fixed it and driven it around, but this is what it is. Sometimes things just don't go your way. Anyways, I hope you guys are enjoying this series with the unrestricted and can't wait to see what we're going to work on next that's non-BMW. Thank you guys for watching. We'll see you guys in our next video.